Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Meeting of the Minds webinar entitled New Infrastructure Financing Tools for California Local Infrastructure Financing Authority. My name is Jessie Feller. I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. A few housekeeping notes to begin. As you entered the WebEx console, you either joined us by audio broadcast or by phone, which was automatically muted. Because of our large audience in attendance today, you guys will remain muted throughout the event. We will have a Q&A during the second half of the hour. When you have a question, please enter them into the WebEx Q&A panel as you think of them. You can find the Q&A panel in the bottom right-hand corner of your console. Please leave the WebEx chat window, which is the middle console, for communication to our WebEx facilitators for any problems or issues you might be experiencing. Again, please enter your questions for our speakers in the Q&A panel, which is the bottom right-hand box. We would appreciate your input regarding today's webinar, so a short survey will pop up when you close your browser at the end of the event. Today we have 4 presenters. First we'll have Fred Silva, who's Senior Policy Advisor at California Forward. Launched in 2008, California Forward is a nonpartisan governance reform organization committed to bolstering democracy and improving the performance of government. Mark Pisano is a professor of the practice of public administration at the USC Stoll Price School of Public Policy. For 31 years, he served as executive director of the Southern California Association of Governments, the nation's largest regional planning agency. Daniel Golub is an associate in the West Coast Land Use and Environment Group in Holland and Knight San Francisco office. And we also have Larry Cosmont, who's the president and CEO of Cosmont Companies, which he founded in 1986. Cosmont Companies is an industry leader in public-private real estate transactions and public finance. You can find more about them on our website at cityminded.org at the link for the webinar. But first, we're going to hear from Fred Silva. Fred, take it away.
Thank you, Jessie, and thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We start with infrastructure and infrastructure finance needs being part of a series of issues facing California. Back in 2012, the California Economic Summit was founded as a partnership between California Forward and the California Stewardship Network. Its purpose was to look at regionally based agendas for the triple bottom line of prosperity, a growing economy, improving environmental quality, and increasing opportunity for all. More than 700 statewide and regional civic leaders were involved in this discussion. It ranged anywhere from housing issues to environmental quality issues to regulation, workforce development, and others. Today, we're going to focus specifically on the infrastructure action team and the recommendations that came out of the summit. We start with the big problem of an aging infrastructure system, a declining state and federal investment in infrastructure, and the recognition that with the repeal of the Redevelopment Authority, that it was time to think more broadly about tools for economic development and local infrastructure financing. It was very clear that there was little interest on the part of the Brown administration to simply reinstall the redevelopment system that had been repealed a year earlier. So the groups got together and began work in 2012 that led to a recommendation in 2013 that, again, rather than simply redoing redevelopment, there needed to be a broader set of tools available to both local governments individually and collectively so that it could facilitate both regional and sub-regional infrastructure agreements and could begin to connect infrastructure investment to workforce training, affordable housing, and other summit priorities. There is a connection that we want to emphasize, that the summit emphasizes, that as you invest in infrastructure, you're going to wind up needing more workforce training and employment. So these things are linked as we have recommended through the summit. So we're going to talk today about the philosophy behind the infrastructure financing district proposal that is now law. We're going to hear a little bit about the intricacies of that statute and how it operates, and then some practical applications. So the first we're going to do is hand it to Mark Pisano to talk about the philosophy behind this enhanced infrastructure financing district law. Mark?
Fred, first of all, thank you. Thank you, California leadership and the Economic Summit. On behalf of the 70 individuals who were on the infrastructure working group, I first want to thank Governor Brown for his leadership in enabling us to move forward on a legislative front, Senator Beal, who is the author of the bill, and the entire legislature for enacting this forward-thinking bill that provides us, the jurisdictions in the state of California, with the tools, let's say the toolbox needed to fund all of our infrastructure needs and economic development activities throughout the state. The legislation is based on the following principle, that when you make investments in infrastructure, investments in your community, that you're creating value. And that if we organize ourselves correctly, we in fact can capture a percentage of that increased value to actually fund the investment. The basic underlying principle is that those who benefit will in fact pay for the benefits that they're receiving. The principles behind this new organization are, first of all, maximum flexibility. We're a diverse state, and we found that previous bills, infrastructure financing districts, and even redevelopment had limitations because they were prescribed on how to approach what they were doing. And rather than be prescriptive, the bill basically enhances maximum flexibility. Flexibility in how you create, first of all, the infrastructure financing districts. It allows all different kinds of sizes of districts, from parts of communities to full communities to cities to counties to regions and even mega regions. Flexibility in how you create the board for these districts, which are public finance authorities. The boards can be comprised of all of the taxing entities within the problem area that are needed to bring the investment plan to the table. The next is flexibility in just the investment plan itself. It's not based upon a single program or a stovepipe, so to speak, but rather transportation can be linked with land use, and it can be linked with housing. It can be linked with other investment needs, as well as with economic development strategies. Those are all part of an investment schedule that then leads to a business plan, which is the funding program, the fund streams necessary to bring the necessary capital to the table so that we, in fact, can move forward with the desired problem solving or goals to be achieved, which is the next principle of this legislation, and that it's goal-oriented. It's not program-oriented. It's what's the goal you're trying to achieve? What investments do you need to put on the table or undertake in order to achieve that investment? And in looking at that, you'll bring multiple revenue streams to the table. The next organizing principle was that planning, finance, and decision-making are integrated. In order to realize land use benefits, specific plans are needed. In order to make the connection between users and investment, a nexus analysis, which is done traditionally in the planning process, but we've not used it for the purpose of finance. We've used it in the past for calculation of benefits. Now they will form the basis of the financing decisions that we make. A final principle that we looked at was, how do we deal with the two Californias? How do we deal with those who are not currently employed to full advantage, and there's plenty in the state as we're reading. And secondly, how do we deal with the older and underperforming areas of the state? All of this leads to a new model for local and regional infrastructure investment in California. First of all, the public finance authorities are separate governmental entities. As separate governmental entities, they're able to use other provisions of state law, just not those included in the statute as well as others. And it enables us to fund all of the infrastructure needed in this state except for schools. enables us to undertake economic development, industrial, commercial, housing. Housing is specifically identified, and finally, environmental cleanup. The model allows multiple jurisdictions, multiple areas, and the geography needed for problem solving to be created. And it's tied with joint powers authority, so you can bring multiple jurisdictions together. And finally, it allows us to organize ourselves. We can bring cities, counties, special districts, private sector, nonprofits. All of the entities that are needed for problem solving can be part of the process, formally through the boards of the districts, as well as partnerships in the financial plans. It's partnerships that enable us to capture the investment funding streams so that private capital can be brought to the table. Now, to describe specifically how you go about organizing your own district, I now turn it over to Dan Gulub.
Well, thanks, Professor Pisano, and thanks to everyone at the Summit and Meeting of the Minds for putting this together. My name is Dan Gulub. I'm an associate with the West Coast Land Use and Environmental Group here at Holland & Knight LLP, and I'm the lawyer on the panel, so it falls to me to talk through the legal nuts and bolts of the EIFD legislation. As I do so, I just want to do so in the context that Professor Pisano just laid out. There was a strong sense that after redevelopment was over, that agencies still should have the authority to invest in infrastructure, not by levying new taxes, but by financing ongoing revenue streams. And there was an equally strong sense that under the current law, there just were no good vehicles to do that. The old infrastructure financing development law was widely thought to be too ineffective and would need enhancement before it would be used widely, and enhance it is exactly what the legislature did in the last legislative session. So let's talk process, let's talk powers, and let's talk prerequisites. How do you set up an EIFD? Well, it's fairly straightforward. You draw a line on a map, you show what district you're trying to improve, and every entity, every taxing entity that collects taxes on properties within that district adopts a resolution of intention to approve, to join an EIFD and to approve an infrastructure financing plan. So the County Board of Supervisors, the City Council, the governing boards of special districts, each of them have the opportunity to say, we want in, and then once they've all said that they're in, a public finance authority is set up to be the governing board of the EIFD, which represents all the stakeholders and represents members of the public. So what do you get for doing all that? Well, you get to tap a very broad range of revenue sources to support a very wide range of infrastructure investments, and we'll talk in some more detail about what those are as we go on. You get a very streamlined process for approval. Local governments can create EIFDs and adopt finance plans on their own after public hearings and public comment, but the only vote by the people, by the voters, is required when bonds are issued, and that threshold has been lowered to 55%. That's a very significant change from the multiple two-thirds vote that was required under previous law. Districts can now exist for up to 45 years after bonding rather than 30 years, as was the case under previous law. That financing, that 15 years can make a big difference for financing. And EIFDs can exercise all authority that redevelopment agencies could under the Polanco Act, which is a very broad authority to conduct environmental remediation and clean up brownfields. Now, there are some prerequisites. First and most importantly, any city or county that created a redevelopment agency must have completed winding down the RDA's affairs, must get your certifications from the Department of Finance and the State Controller. So if you haven't gotten that done, you have to call Larry Cosmot today. He can help you because you can't create an EIFD until you've done it. Second, there are the usual requirements for public hearings and public input and biannual reporting. While the voting threshold has been reduced, everything has to be done in the light of day. And finally, the law has some requirements to replace any lost housing and to provide displacement assistance, but those only kick in if the EIFD funds a project that destroys housing. We don't think most EIFDs are going to do that, but if they do, they have to replace anything that they've lost. So what are the funding strategies that are available? Well, first, most importantly, is all the property tax revenue that is created in the district and that flows to these taxing entities, with the exception of anything that could go to schools. That's the one thing redevelopment agencies could do that EIFDs certainly cannot. But practically every other property tax revenue is on the table, and that includes revenues on the growth of the property tax that's attributed to what we refer to as the backfill from the vehicle license fee. So it really puts most property tax revenue on the table. And there's some other revenue sources in the statute. For example, a long list of fees and assessment revenues that are collected within a district are also available to be tapped towards financing. And then the third bullet that I list here, these are financing possibilities that aren't specifically in the Act, but we urge you to think creatively about possibilities. So for example, as the new public financing authority that governs the EIFD should be able to participate in a public-private partnership, P3 agreements. There are federal state grant programs that should be looked into. We're looking very closely at California's cap and trade auction proceed program, which has programs available to benefit disadvantaged communities. When you put it all together, all the revenue sources in the Act and things outside the Act, you can put together a pretty robust plan for infrastructure investment. Now, what can you bond to build? Well, Larry Cosmon's going to talk in more detail about some specific possibilities. I'll just give you the legal prerequisites, which are the range of investments that EIFDs can fund is quite broad. Generally, they can finance the purchase, construction, or improvement of any real or tangible property, or even any related planning and design work. And EIFDs are not limited to only funding public capital facilities, as previously was required under the law. Now, any project of community-wide significance is the magic phrase. Any project that meets that definition can be funded, even if it's not within the district, as long as it has a tangible connection to the district. The statute lists some specific possibilities, and I've listed them here, but the most important thing to note is that the statute is clear that this is a non-exhaustive list. So it's an opportunity to think really big about things that might fall within the statute's purview. On this slide, we've just done a little analysis of how EIFDs fit into previously existing financing vehicles. Many of you are probably familiar with Melrose Community Facilities Districts. Those are great, but you have to both politically and procedurally be able to get through an assessment of a new tax. Classic IFDs, which were very rarely used, allowed for tax increment financing, but there were so many limits on the things that they could fund, and they were not used very often. And EIFDs have really come into a real sweet spot right in the middle that provide some opportunities that just didn't exist under previous law. So when should you think about creating an EIFD? Well, I think there's a lot of scenarios in which it makes a real sense to think about. If you have a well-developed idea for an infrastructure plan, but you're short on financing, if you're in an area that's plagued by this problem where you've just got too many overlapping taxing entities, a county, a city, a couple special districts, an assessment district, this is a great opportunity to work together. Areas where planning work is needed, or maybe a small discrete area that has very low residential population but just a few property owners. If the area has less than 8 registered voters, the vote that is taken to issue bonds for an EIFD is actually taken by the property owners with 1 vote per acre. So an area like that might be a very promising opportunity to have some low-hanging fruit be picked off. That more or less wraps up my presentation. If you'd like to find out more, though, my colleague Nicholas Targ, who's a partner with our firm, and I wrote an article online with more details, and you can find it by Googling Holland and Knight Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. There's a URL there, but I think Google's probably the fastest way to find it. And I should just mention that the team here at Holland and Knight has a lot of experience counseling governments and developers on this and related topics. We were recently joined by Doug Praw, who's a public finance expert in our Los Angeles office. Some of you in Southern California probably know him. He and others would be very happy to talk further if you have further questions, and my contact information is above. So thanks very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation, and now I'd like to turn things over to Larry Cosmon.
Good morning, everyone. Larry Cosmon, Cosmon Companies. Pleasure to be here, and especially want to thank California Forward, Fred Silva, and for his leadership, Mark Pisano for leading the infrastructure group, and certainly Dan for the prior presentation. You know, I think that as we sit here trying to figure out how to put the pieces together for investing in economic development programs and improving infrastructure locally and regionally, we have to also get a sense of where the state is driving us. You know, in a way, this whole legislation of EIFDs, you know, reminds me of a bit of that show game in the street in New York. We were all trying to keep our eye on where the pellet would be, and we were trying to find redevelopment 2.0. And in that period of time when we had our eye on the wrong shell, the state and the governor in particular pushed us toward an era of sustainability and capital improvements via public infrastructure and set up a budget and this EIFD law that essentially converges the need for developing local and regional infrastructure that's sustainability oriented, that focuses on issues like water, drought, groundwater, as well as the typical infrastructure that we can finance publicly, but also starts to push our investments toward compliance with sustainability through the SCS program, as first established in SB 375 and AB 32. And then he threw a dose of grant monies through the Greenhouse Grant Funding Program that allows us to access about $1 billion a year in taxes. And so when you sort of take, I call this Chiapino financing or Bouillabaisse financing, because when you, at the end of the day, when you really look at where the state has been driving us toward public infrastructure, we can use EIFDs, I believe, to fund that infrastructure using a variety of sources. But most importantly, I think we can use the tax increment to also induce private investment and move our economic development agenda locally under this umbrella. So I think this ends up being a pretty robust program, and my point is that I think we were all looking at redevelopment 2.0, and I think now we're viewing that tax increment is back, but it's back under a different patina. It's a different canvas, and the canvas is being defined by a series of legislation. So for all of us, particularly my local government clients that are sitting there running city halls and running county halls and special districts, we've had our eye on the ball on our particular local issues and our particular public-private projects. But the palette of legislation that's demonstrated on this slide is really telling us that, look, if you, lift your head up, out of the detail for a minute, and you start looking at the power or the leverage that's available from multiple sources through an EIFD, which, by the way, is not perfect. I mean, it needs to be smoothed out. We're just at the precipice of this. But if you look at it as a non-blight tested way of imposing or implementing tax increment, and then you add to it the other features of new legislation that, combines CEQA streamlining for infill projects, gives priority to TOD, on the right side provides funding for greenhouse gas and carbon footprint programs, including infill housing, TOD, and those kinds of, mixed-use projects. We have a fairly healthy agenda here that we can pursue. But the step one, in my view, is to really get our arms around not just 628, but all the other laws that either induce us to provide or use EIFDs for economic development, or more importantly, for sustainable infrastructure, because that's where the state's going, and that's where the governor's state budget is. So the pieces start to fall together. In other words, as I think the governor started to view how EIFDs could be used, I think they saw, and the state sees, and we at some level see, that the problems are pretty global. They're about climate change, they're about greenhouse gas emissions, carbon footprint reduction, and aging infrastructure. When you piece these things together, and you start to visualize an investment strategy that can also induce private investment toward programs that can be financed under an EIFD, you start to get creative, and you can be creative not only about your own issues, but the regional issues and the sub-regional issues that we're all being asked to implement under the various new pieces of legislation. So boiling it down, the EIFD really just gives us the ability to establish a new entity called an Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. It's an entity established by a city or the county as a lead. Right now, those are the two entities that can lead it. Ultimately, before adoption of the infrastructure financing plan, that legislative body needs to identify and implement the public financing authority, which becomes the the administering arm and the policy arm of the and lead of the EIFD, and it's composed of the participating governments, and there are some questions as to how that can be managed. And in turn, that public financing authority and the EIFD in particular adopts the infrastructure financing plan, which is project specific and objective specific, but is over a broad area, defined geographic area. The beauty, I think, of what we face here is that, as I said before, kind of like a buoy-based financing program, we can sprinkle, in my view, a number of other sources that we've never ever been able to sort of co-leverage very easily, even under redevelopment. For example, for the first time, I think we can look to special district financing, Melroses. We can perhaps look to a lease-leaseback between a hotel through a JPA on a hotel transaction to generate annual revenues to help leverage up tax increment in the EIFD. We can look at development agreements and impact fees, user fees, benefit assessments, and most importantly, we can structure private investments so that it helps our local agencies, one, create the infrastructure district, because there are some administrative requirements in the setup. So I think motivated private investors are likely to actually support the creation of an EIFD as long as the district covers projects that benefit private investment. And I think the way we look at that private investment is to match our infrastructure to the private investment that we're inducing, and then we have the elixir for an economic development project. In addition, there are some new tools, new funding tools, I should say, or sources. We have Prop 1 bond funds. We have cap and trade proceeds that'll reach $1 billion a year. It's a new world out there is all I'm really saying, and that is if you can be a little bit creative and you can specify what you want to get done and who your partners are, both from the public side and the private side, you can get through this process and form an EIFD and go back to work on economic development programs that, frankly, we would have had a harder time doing under redevelopment, because when you look at the private facilities under the law that can be implemented, they are pretty broad, acquisition, construction, repair of industrial structures, tenant improvements, transit priority projects, mixed income projects. These are all things that some of which we could do under redevelopment, but other things were not as easy. And I'm not suggesting that this will be easy, but I think it's a formidable concept that can be implemented. It may require some additional work as we move forward, but the process as we know it now is that if you have had a successor agency, you really need to get through the finding of completion and make certain certifications that there are no assets that will be in the EIFD that are still under litigation, and that the state controller post-2011 activity has been signed off. That audit and review has been signed off and completed. The next real step is identifying the essentials of the EIFD. You need to identify the infrastructure, reach out to stakeholders as the lead agency, and then establish the public financing authority. And then you can adopt your resolution of intent to create the EIFD, draft the IFP, and adopt it and form the EIFD itself. It's a process that I try to reduce down to a graphic that basically shows that, in essence, you have a pathway that starts with the intent to establish the EIFD and identify projects and absolutely partners and private property owners that are going to be interested in supporting this effort, and essentially create both the plan and the public financing authority, certainly prior to having your public hearing, approving the IFP, and adopting the ultimate resolution. I'm sure there'll be questions about the steps. We can answer them, but back to, I think, the larger issue for us. What can we do? What is it that makes the convergence of such a broad palette of potential public infrastructure projects and private sector projects benefit from a broad set of sources of funds that could be used under an EIFD? And I think the answer is clear. We don't absolutely know the best and the priority projects that we can move forward with today, but I can tell you that at Cosmont we're looking at significant business parks in more suburban areas where you have ownership of 12 and under that require infrastructure, local and regional infrastructure that doesn't exist. Those projects create literally thousands of jobs. They're tied to the digital economy. I think that's one beneficiary. We're also looking at various hotel projects, both urban and suburban, where we can provide, a rededication of the tax from the hotel as part of a funding source to the ongoing leverage to make public infrastructure improvements that support the hotel project directly or indirectly. So we have a number of transactions that are revenue and job rich that are, sitting there waiting to look at how to use and implement the EIFD. And I think that we will have some success as we start to size these projects and figure out what the process is, the details of the process of forming the district, and moving forward and trying to implement. So it's a new law, it's a new world, and my point is that at some level, we're past the loss of redevelopment as we get through the DOF approvals. And by the way, we have 317 findings of completion as of today, at least by Cosmont's count, with about over 100 pieces of litigation still moving forward. There's 149 approved PMPs so far. So it seems to me that we're not all the way through that process, and it may be a while before some cities or successor agencies get there. But more and more are moving forward and ready to use EIFDs, and I think EIFDs are a chapter to be implemented as we start looking at our property management plans and figuring out what resources we have and how to create a beneficial district for both infrastructure improvements and private investment that can be triggered, leveraged, and funded through an EIFD. So
Great.
I'll turn this back. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. We're going to now move into our Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them into the bottom right-hand box in the Q&A panel. And we'll, there's no bad question. We'll have about a little less than 25 minutes to answer all your questions specifically. And also I wanted to just refresh everyone's memory that the slides are available for download already. In the middle console in the chat window, you'll see that link on our website, cityminded.org, as well as the recording will be up later today in a few hours, so you can share that with colleagues as well. So I see there's over 230 people here. I'm sure there's some questions out there. I dare someone to ask one. Specific, broad, I see there's a lot of people from governor's office, local cities, Oxnard, San Jose, a lot of infrastructure companies, planning companies. So feel free to ask a question, type it into the bottom right-hand corner. We have one question already. Okay, great. Ignacio asks, what happens if the bonds are issued by an SPV, either for-profit or not-for-profit, as part of a P3? Would that need voter approval? The bonds would be non-recourse back to the JFA in this scenario. Maybe, Dan, you want to try to answer that one?
I'm not sure I caught every one of those acronyms, and it sounds like a fairly detailed question. The authority to enter P3 agreements is not part of the new law, and I'd need to sit down and look very specifically at what the requirements are for P3 agreements. I think we mentioned it mostly just because it's a promising opportunity and something should be thought about. Obviously, it doesn't change any requirements that would ordinarily apply to the creation of P3 agreements, so you'd have to follow all those. And sometimes there'll be little slightly complicated questions as we try to overlay the new authority under EIFDs with some existing requirements. I don't know if Fred has any thoughts on that, but I think there's always going to be a little question where we put two statutes right next to each other and figure out if we're overlaying districts and doing two different things, how do we make sure we've checked every box that's required under both different statutes?
Yeah, this is Fred. I think one of the objectives that the administration had with respect to the vote requirement was that if you're using tax allocation bonds, that is to say you're securing long-term bonds with a portion of the growth in the property tax, they were very concerned that there should be some voter approval involved. So I think the voter approval requirement for that 55% is limited to tax allocation bonds.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Douglas asks, most former RDAs won't be completely wound down for 30 years when all bond payments are paid off. Must the implementation of an EIFD wait until this date? Mark, you want to answer that one?
The expert on that would be Fred, but my response on that would be that the EIFD can move forward, assuming they have clearance on their legal obligations, can move forward and implement them simultaneously.
Yes, I think Mark's correct there, and Daniel, or Larry, you may want to chime in here. The certification that the Department of Finance does is for the winding down of the agency. The agency still may have obligations that go on over time, and obviously if they've got tax allocation bonds outstanding, then there are property taxes that are allocated to those. But once you get a certification from Department of Finance, I think you're free to go. Is that right, Larry?
Yes. So my sense of how this is drafted and has it been approved is that once you get your finding of a completion, to the extent that you can certify your non-litigation on the assets, and to the extent that you get through the controller's review and audit, you may have debt as the prior agency, and the RPTTF payments are going to deduct for that. But the reality is, you can move forward on the EIFD and pursue a project that uses whatever available increment might be available, and as well as new increment as it comes online.
Great. Zia asks, and I'll let you guys decide who answers this, how is the proposed private funding opportunities different than municipal bonds? Is this the same as P3? Is the private investment guaranteed by the Public Investment Authority? Fred, maybe you start.
Larry. We'll hand that one to Larry.
I don't think that the guarantee is necessarily entirely meant for the Public Financing Authority. I think the Public Financing Authority can obviously leverage tax increment, but to the extent that it has other sources of financing available to it, it may be a direct commitment, it may be an indirect commitment. I'm just not certain. I think that's going to be very project specific. I don't, in a lot of ways, I think this tool is not that different from being able to leverage local tax revenues for infrastructure as it currently stands using a JPA or some other format that we've used before, leasebacks and so on. I think the difference here is that you can get the pledge of tax increment within a district, number one, and you can involve other taxing entities, including a special district and the county. And so those are, those are applications, I think, that are more formalized and available under the EIFD structure and would be left open for great question if you didn't have that structure.
If I might add to that, the concept behind the statute would be that there would not be a public guarantee for all issuances, but rather it's the participation of multiple streams of funds that give sufficient security to deal with the market risk issue of issuing obligations in this public good arena. And in some, if government and private entities and the community are participating jointly, that would give additional security to those purchasing these bonds. But there is no formal guarantee or backstop, so to speak.
Let me go a little bit further. The statute is actually explicit in case there's cities and counties that are on the phone worrying about this, but that they are absolutely not the debt of the city, county, or state or any of its political subdivisions. So the benefit of that is you don't have to worry about that. The drawback is then you have to come up with an infrastructure financing appealable to the public finance community on its own strength. But that's the vehicle that's set up under the EIFD statute.
And this whole movement across the country to move to revenue-backed systems as opposed to tax-supported systems, the issue on the table of market risk is the underlying dilemma. It was our design in putting the various funding sources together that we would provide a plausible response to that concern.
Great. Another question from Joan. If the EIFD is within an existing project area, will the county continue to receive contractual pass-throughs on the tax increment, and can that be directed to the project? I'll let you guys decide who answers that.
Larry,
this is Larry Cosma. I believe the county will receive that contractual pass-through until the obligations of the agency or the prior agency are extinguished. I think that is the way the dissolution law and process has been working. To the extent that there is additional tax increment flow that is not purposed and that is accruable to the founding taxing agency for the EIFD, I think the benefit there is that you can reach in and get unallocated or unobligated funds to apply to your new EIFD projects once you've adopted the EIFD.
Good, thanks. I'm going to combine these two questions. Glenda asks, can EIFDs be used to fund county fairground facilities? And then Mark asks, are community colleges able to use EIFDs? So uses, I guess, is the question. Who can use them and for what?
Let me start. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, with regard to county fairground facilities, as I mentioned, I think the authority is really quite broad under the statute.
Yeah.
If it qualifies as the development or improvement of a real or tangible property with an estimated useful life of 15 years, it qualifies. So there's a list of specific ones, and I can't say that county fairgrounds made the list of specific ideas, but if it fits within that statutory definition, it should be something that an EIFD can finance. And the law is very much designed to have a pretty broad range of possibilities financed.
A county fairground would contribute to a community benefit, which is the ultimate criterion. And therefore, I think under, as Dan pointed out, under the non-exclusive definition of what's eligible, it would certainly rank high. On the community college, the legislation specifically prohibits the expenditure of funds for educational purposes.
Okay, great. Yeah, there was another question about child care. As far as child care, can we offer our cities incentives to establish a large facility that educates youth, similar to daycare but on a larger scale? But is that considered an educational use?
No, actually, child care facility is actually explicitly in the Act.
In the Act, yes.
Okay, great. I think this question is for Larry. How do you envision leveraging Prop 1 bonding capacity using EIFDs? Can state agencies benefit from this too?
I think state agencies, I suspect, can benefit from the standpoint that a local jurisdiction, including an EIFD, is moving toward implementation of Prop 1 projects. And using Prop 1 funds. Now, the issue we'll have is that I think that Prop 1 bond funds could be used for, water improvement, water storage, water treatment and transfer projects pursuant to Prop 1. The issue we'll have is when it comes to leverage, you have a one-time source of funds, and you're going to create obligations to leverage tax increment for a project that is wanting to use those funds over a period of time. So I think what we will find in this menu of sources is that we have what we call more static one-time sources available, and that could be a Prop 1 allocation. That could be a greenhouse gas fund allocation, and that could be, in essence, at some level, what the state can contribute to a regional project. And then you're going to have the complementary use of ongoing leverage of tax increment and other, and other funding mechanisms that come out of the local jurisdictions. That could be a tax reimbursement agreement that flows over a number of years using sales tax or TOT. It could be a loan from a local agency that has a stipulated set of payments or contributions over a period of time. And so it's really a blend now of different kinds of sources, what I call sort of the one-time or two-time static sources, and the ongoing leverage that comes out of increment and increment-like type contributions. But either way, I think the state can come up with its one-time contribution, let's say, and locals can come up with ongoing contributions, and that blend could be formulated under an EIFD financing and an infrastructure financing plan, and you can accomplish some pretty, significant regional projects at that basis and comply with state law, which is another benefit to the state.
If I might add to that, Larry's description of use of state and federal grant and or bond money, including that in the business plan for the Public Finance Authority, it was certainly part of the design of the legislation. Another area that has possibilities, and that is where state agencies themselves partner with local entities. And that is a partnership arrangement. I believe under the statute, as long as the locals lead and are the responsible entity, the state agency could be a partner with the Public Finance Authority.
Great. Perfect. Thanks, guys. Brandon asks, I think this is for you, Dan, does the housing mitigation requirement only apply to affordable housing, or does it apply to all housing?
Yeah, actually, I believe, let me just check very carefully, but my understanding is that it applies if any housing is destroyed. And I probably shouldn't get into the details, but there's a slightly different calculation depending upon whether the housing that has been lost was designated as affordable or wasn't. But you have some obligations if you destroy housing of any kind, is the answer to your question. Again, the legislation says that it is not the intention of the legislature that that's what EIFDs are going to do very often, destroy existing dwelling units that are currently occupied. It's really a backstop. If EIFDs were to choose to do such a project, they have to relocate anybody lost, and they have to create some affordable housing, and they have to create sort of more affordable housing if the housing they displaced was previously designated as affordable.
Great. Dave asks, and I'm not sure who this is for, maybe you, Dan. Do you have any estimate of how long the formation process will take with a reasonable level of support from other taxing entities?
That sounds like a question about politics.
It is.
I mean, the bottom line is you need a resolution of intention through the legislative body of every taxing entity that wants to participate. After that, I don't think there's a lot of lag time. I think that EIFDs can then get up and running as quickly as they can, start getting an office space somewhere and printing paper. The process of what it will take to get these municipal governments and agencies to buy in is very much dependent upon political will. So I'm afraid I don't have a more detailed answer for you than that. The process is to get something through the legislative bodies or the governing boards of the district. Once that's done, I think EIFDs can get up and running pretty quickly.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, this is Larry Cosmon. This is a pretty strategic question in my view, because there's an early requirement to establish a infrastructure financing plan, an IFP, and I think that the key to the timing and the buy-in from other agencies, including your own, by the way, to go ahead and encumber itself and get involved in an EIFD, which is a long-term commitment, is really as much about the kinds of things you want to accomplish, the projects you want to select, both locally and regionally, and the sources that you think you need, commitments from other agencies as well as your own, to get them done. So the vision that gets established in the IFP, the breadth of it, the timing of it, the sequencing of it, I think that becomes the question that gets debated when you're out there briefing the public, talking to other potential partner agencies, and trying to demonstrate why the benefit is there to have some kind of collective, measure going forward. I think alternatively, there are agencies that are going to say, you know what, I'm just going to go it alone. I make enough of my own tax increment, and I have a prescribed set of projects that I can leverage. I'm going to use greenhouse gas funding sources. I'm going to use, some sales tax and other tax reimbursement agreements to produce loans for, startup costs and investment, and I can use some private sector investor money, and I can go it alone. I suspect that that's a model that also can proceed. But the question's an important one, because I think all of us, as we're thinking about how to best implement an EIFD, the answer is, what's in the bag? I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? Are you going to, what does your IFP look like? Who are the beneficiaries? What are the controversies around it? What are the costs? What are the sources? And the better you can define that, articulate it, and demonstrate the benefits, I think the easier time you'll have in terms of a process, and that should accelerate the program. If you get mired in controversy early, you may never get it off the ground.
Could I add to Larry's response, stating it's a matter of strategy? One of the prompting forces for our working group moving this forward was that there was a substantial portion of transportation, water, housing, you name the plans that are unfunded that have been approved by agencies. The whole sustainable community program is constantly running into the issue of what's the funding that will enable us to move forward. So there's a backlog of needs, there's a backlog of problems, and that backlog of needs and problems that are meaningful to the community is will be the motivating force to bring departments within cities together, communities together, and regions together to fund facilities. And given the backlog within the state, the time period for moving forward hopefully will be short. And the reason for parties heretofore not cooperating or working with one another is that they didn't have the vehicles, particularly the funding vehicles, to do that. And the Joint Powers Act is directly linked to the implementation of these EIFD capacities.
Great. Thanks for that. We have a practical question from Robert Danning. Maybe we want to start on this and then everyone can chime in. What's the best way for a small city in rural California to get started?
Oh, is that one for me?
Start on that? Yeah, just start.
If you're a small city, there's a portion of the act that certainly strongly implies that it would be a city or a county. If not, it doesn't outright say so. It pretty strongly implies that it would be a city or a county that would start the process up. My advice would be to look at an area or look at an infrastructure improvement and sort of start there. If you're looking at an area which you think could benefit from infrastructure improvement, I'd make a list of who collects taxes in that area. County government probably collects taxes. Are there special districts or others that collect taxes? And start a conversation about regional collaboration. If you want to start from the project basis, if you know a project that you really want to get started, I'd again think about which area within your city is one that this would be a project of community-wide significance to that area. As long as it has a tangible connection to that area, it's an infrastructure investment that you might be able to finance with revenue streams that are collected in that area. That's probably what I'd suggest to first get started.
Great. Larry, anything to add, or Mark, Fred?
No, I think that Daniel really covered it. And those in rural areas should feel that this statute could be applies to them. While their increment may not be that large, the organizing capacity to bring multiple revenue streams together and programs together can be used by all in the state.
Well, I guess the other thing I'd add is that to the extent a smaller jurisdiction has a portion of its community where the property ownership is 12 or less, and you think that the IFP is going to require, an actual bond, then certainly the voting requirements for that district will be streamlined when you have, cooperating property owners 12 and under. So that's just a strategic consideration on the financing side.
Yeah, this is Fred. One point that was made, which I think is an important one, and Dan made it early on, and that is that this statute is quite flexible. And what it requires is a community look at what its needs are. And so if there are particular infrastructure needs in a rural community, the question is, what's the problem and how should we go about solving it? Again, as has been mentioned several times, flexibility is really important here. This is not a statute that's geared to one particular kind of problem, but rather a broad base of community issues, whether they're housing or resource management issues or transportation.
And just on that point about flexibility, I don't want to give the impression that you need multiple taxing entities to participate in an EIFD. I think the legislation is designed to accommodate that in a very flexible way. But if you're a city that has some tax increment and you think you could finance something on your own, the EIFD legislation is absolutely available for you to use.
So again, just one other thing. Again, I think it's back to my comment about, and Mark's as well, about the strategic considerations. The sooner you can figure out what you want to get done, I think the easier it is to figure out who you need or don't need and what area is going to be most beneficial and what likely sources of funds you're going to want to go after in addition to the ones that you have, and whether or not the complications of a vote politically will be there or not. So really getting the core strategy focused early on is key, because it'll lead you down the road to making the right decisions about whether you go it alone, which I suspect many of our clients will do, or you don't, whether you pursue bonds and are expecting a vote to do that, or use other sources, other kinds of debt that aren't a bond. Those are the fundamental checklist kinds of questions that I think you have to pose to yourself and your team before you just get out there and trot out the idea, hey, let's just go form an EIFD. I think there ought to be a real scrutiny and a tight checklist of questions that you put yourself through before you start, figuring out how to best get out there in a public dialogue. Mark, I'd be interested in what you think about that, but that's the way I view it.
Well, the notion of templates and frameworks that can then be used in a strategic way, I think is the best way to get started on this. And the last comment on that is if a community has a plan or a vision and is in wondering how do we get there, these EIFD and the structure and the process and these financing authorities are really the toolbox to do it.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Mark, maybe this is for you. What happens if one or more of the taxing entities elect to not participate in the EIFD? How is the tax revenue for those agencies choosing not to participate handled?
Well, that question I think would apply to projects that are larger in scale, I'm assuming, where you need multiple parties to participate. And my response to that would be if the business case isn't made and the benefits aren't on the table, as the starting out argument, it's going to be hard to get cooperation. When that is demonstrated, and this nexus analysis between who benefits and what are the expenditures and the collective benefits, I'll just say that I taught a studio this past semester, both involving regional projects. The benefits of larger scale projects are really significant. When those are brought to the table, I think it will change the political dialogue of who cooperates and who participates. We've never done that in the past. When you put that on the table, it becomes pretty powerful political arguments.
Great. Well, we have dozens of questions we weren't able to get to, but we will try to answer those through a blog post or two from the presenters, who I'm putting on the spot now to answer these via our blog, cityminded.org. But before I wrap up, I'm going to give Fred a minute or 20 seconds. Fred?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jesse, and thank you for Meeting of the Minds for sponsoring this discussion. And thank all of you for participating. This work carries on. The California Economic Summit will be meeting in November of 2015 in Ontario. You can find out more about our regional convenings and the statewide convening next November by going to caeconomy.org. I'd invite all of you to participate. It's quite simple. Simply go on that website and join us in the discussion. There are many action teams. You'll see that on the website. So please do your best to participate with all of us because it's all part of you in what all of us do looking to the future of California. So again, thank you all very much for participating, and we look forward to a continuing discussion about the vibrancy of California's economy.
Great, thanks, Fred. So just a quick wrap-up that will conclude our session today. Just a reminder, a short survey will pop up once you close your browser, and we greatly appreciate everyone's feedback. We hope to see you guys on our blog, cityminded.org. Hopefully we'll be able to answer more of your questions through a couple blog posts. We have monthly webinars, so we'll hopefully see you there. We do meetups around the country every month. And our own annual summit on urban sustainability, innovation, and technology is convening October 20 to 22 in Richmond, California. And obviously we will need to have a few sessions about this topic since it's new, popular, and really relevant for so many of you working in cities around the state. So have a great day, and thanks again for attending, everyone. And thanks to our presenters, Larry, Dan, Mark, and Fred. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.